would anyone like to ask anything or make a comment at this stage? No, everyone's everyone's staying quiet now.
So the Jewish sources, what would one look at for the Jewish sources then, if you were just in the background to get?
So it's kind of complicated because there are a lot of writings, Jewish writings, and they're difficult to always time exactly when they were written down. So I've put a quote up there from what's referred to as the Targums. The Targums is a title that means it was they're kind of commentaries on verses, and they give us clues as to how obviously the Jewish writers interpret those verses. So that was a Targum on the Lamentations, where actually Jeremiah draws together the idea of the priest and the prophet, and with the destruction of Jerusalem, which is how come then the Targum then draws together the idea of the old Zechariah and the new Zechariah. It seems to link them together. The stories of how Zechariah, how his death happens and where it happens is more precise, and the idea that his blood is bubbling up like Abel's, which is ties with the idea of Jesus doing it. That comes from the midrashes, and the midrashes are the kind of supposedly discussions between various rabbis who exist in history. Some of them predate Jesus, some of them come afterwards, but all of them got written down afterwards. So it's difficult to know exactly when those ideas were circulating, but you can see in them ideas around the death of Zechariah the priest, which are very much seem to be reflected in the way Jesus describes. So it might be part of therefore the Jewish understanding of his death between the sanctuary and the altar, and so on and so forth. But I'm afraid there's no one simple source, Colin. That's really the thing.
Yeah.
But the good news is the way the internet is working is often you can find a source and you can go and look at the source because you'll find a reference to something somewhere else, So that's how I tend to find them nowadays. When I started Bible study, it was all in books, and the idea of to being able to do what we can do now, you would need a whole library of material, and you'd need to know how to access it. Nowadays, you get a reference, and you can go and find the source document on a totally different site, and you can see that they're not making these things up. It really does say in these texts the things that are said. So that's how I do it, Colin. I always like to trace it back to find translation of the document, but often I find it because someone will make a comment about it somewhere, and now you can trace your way back and see whether you can trace it right the way back to source.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other thoughts or questions? So was it kind of helpful or confusing to look at that that sort of little bit where?
Well, it's helpful because I have seen that that criticism before of it's not from Isaiah, so
yeah.
So that sort of and I didn't really have a way of answering that, so that's helpful.
Yeah.
Even if it turned out to be a different explanation, at least it stands like a probable explanation anyway.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So
I think it's highlighted in the notes to the Schofield Bible.
Is what? Sorry, Stephen.
Highlighted in the notes to the Schofield Reference Bible.
What in Isaiah or in the prophets? Is that the one that you mean, or in this one here?
The fact that there seems a conflict between which Zechariah was being spoken about.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
and a potential solution.
There's the potential. Okay, and it's in there. Yeah, as I say, there are various ways of solving it, and I've kind of highlighted. Is it that because some manuscripts of Matthew don't, should it be there or not? But actually, the majority do. So is it something that Jesus said, but when he said it, is he drawing in a wider understanding that people would have, because these ideas have been summed up? That's and we can actually see this in so there is a whole body, because I found it referenced. I'm not going to read it all because it's a huge amount of the way in which certain things are packed together in the rabbinic writings. So they're kind of gathered together around certain threads, and that's understandable. you get your head around that Jesus therefore could use something as a kind of a title way that draws in various ideas that his listeners would immediately relate to. But as you move out of a Jewish context and out of that understanding, it now looks more like a contradiction because we think of things in very different ways, but we gather them and group them in different ways. But any other thoughts or questions?
I'm interested, Kristen, in the comment that you made about the mint and dill and cumin and the way in which we can ignore the smaller detail, and in the same way maybe as the Pharisees were ignoring the larger picture, that we can excuse ourselves by ignoring the detail.
The small, I'm more and more, it makes sense to me, because I can remember as a young Christian, it's great, we have this freedom. So, I can go as a Christian teenager, I can drink beer, unlike my brethren friends. So, but as you get older, you start to realize, actually, there's often a grace that comes on those people who have learned to honor. And it's not because it's a work of law, but somehow they have bought all of these different areas. And actually, there's often a kind of a grace in that somehow if we take the kind of the purely sort of more licentious approach, we lose the grace that goes with those things. And I think that we would normally read that passage and we would focus on, look at the important things: justice, mercy, faithfulness, But Jesus says, do those, but it's good that you do those other things because you're actually bringing more of your life, but don't do them and say, because I do that, I don't need to do this, So yeah.
I was thinking this morning about that in the context of praying and how do I pray? So do I pray through a list, which can feel a bit religious and regimented, but it's something that I know my dad did, and I could see outworking the benefit of it. Rather than my approach would often be to be praying in the more spontaneous.
And so I would be similar,
lacking in the particular,
No, and part of it, for me has been I've learned, because I've coming from a more spontaneous tradition, and Judith that came from a more Anglican tradition, and actually recognizing sometimes the sort of the focus that's brought by some of those more liturgical ways, and so actually between the balance you find there's value in both things. But the important thing in the mix is not to lose your priorities, but that doesn't mean to say the priority then becomes an excuse for every other area. So good. Well, I'm glad that was helpful, Joe.
Interesting to see it there this morning. Was that exactly what I was praying about this morning? Right.
Okay. Oh, there you go. It's always nice when that happens. Good. Well, we have now gone past 2:00. I always think about the fantasy I had of finishing in half an hour. But okay. But it's I'm kind of feeling hopeful that we're kind of heading towards the end of Matthew now. Big culmination. In truth, we've still got 5 chapters to go. But so it'll probably be more like Christmas by the time we're done. But thank you for being here, folks. And hopefully there's useful things everyone's getting out of the times.
Thanks, Kristen. Yes, thank you.
Brilliant. I certainly get stuff out of preparing them, because I tend to relook at stuff and see things again for new ways. But brilliant. Okay, well, I'll say goodbye then.
Thank you, Chris, and bye everyone.
Bye.
Yes, bye.
Thanks everyone. Bye.